Hello and welcome to today's Q&A session with the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce on the implications of the conflict in Ukraine for local businesses. Now, of course, our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine and their loved ones the world over, whose lives have been utterly devastated by this crisis. At the Chamber, we're a leading business organisation helping members do business locally and globally. And throughout this crisis, the Chamber has been working to connect our members to the latest intelligence on the emerging situation, but also support them in unpicking the implications for local businesses. Now, we're currently working with our expert members and patrons to produce bite-sized briefing videos and resources on key areas like this today. Now, today I'm joined by Phil Bindley of Intercity Technology, Managing Director for Cloud and Security. And Phil previously joined us to discuss the possibility of cyber attacks in the UK on a previous Q&A. So, Phil, thanks very much for joining us today. But since our last video, the UK government has announced that Russia was responsible for a series of cyber attacks since the invasion of Ukraine. How likely is that we'll experience something similar as the UK sanctions on Russia intensify?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Raj. And from what we've seen so far, there's really been very little evidence of anything directly affecting UK from Russia outside of what happens all the time, because cyber attacks are something that businesses need to be prepared for regardless of the current situation in Ukraine. And I think that there have been, and the National Cybersecurity Centre have reported that there have been direct attacks at Ukraine infrastructure. Viasat, a sort of internet service provider, Satcom's business out there, were affected. But there's no real evidence that anything directly in the UK as a direct result of what's happening in Ukraine has so far been compromised, put it that way. I think the National Cybersecurity Centre's latest sort of guidelines on it are that it's unlikely that there's going to be a major attack against UK infrastructure, but that doesn't mean that it won't happen. And obviously, I think it was back in March that the UK was put on the unfriendly list by Russia because of the fact that we're taking part in the sanctions and providing munitions to the Ukraine forces. So I think it's one of those things where it's possible, but I don't think it's massively likely at this moment in time that there will be a huge cyber attack against UK national infrastructure. But that doesn't mean that businesses shouldn't be well prepared, because we are at a time of heightened risk. And the National Cybersecurity Centre are quite clear in their guidance on this. At times of heightened risk, when the cyber threat is, more likely than it is in normal circumstances, that there are, sets of steps that businesses should be taking to just double check that they are protecting themselves as well as they should be.
Yeah, we'll come on to talk about some of those steps in a minute. But what do you think are the challenges, the risks, the threats that businesses are currently facing from Russia? I mean, what might a cyber attack actually look like?
Yeah, I think we're fairly familiar with the most common modus operandi of these sort of cyber threats and cyber actors and what they try to do. And there's two or maybe three things that they're looking to do. One is to just disrupt, so just to cause chaos, stop businesses being able to trade for whatever reason. And there's no real monetary gain for the cyber criminal, whether they're state-sponsored actors or whether they are financially motivated organizations. That sort of attack is all about just causing disruption, causing chaos, impacting the wider economy, perhaps. Whereas what we see for, small to medium-sized organizations, perhaps more so than, large public sector bodies, etc., is that it's more than likely to be a ransomware attack, whereby they are trying to extort money. It's blackmail. The impact on the business is the same. It's identical, regardless of whether it's something that's just aimed to disrupt or whether it's something that's aimed to extort financial gain. The end business is going to face exactly the same set of challenges, that their users won't be able to access systems, that their customers won't be able to buy from them. So, and that's regardless of what's going on in Ukraine. That's a problem that every business should be thinking about and discussing at board level, every time they sit down to talk about these things, because ultimately it's a risk, and that's how private sector organizations are based on understanding risk and then doing something about that risk. Risk management's a very, very simple process. It's about number one, understand what your risks are, and then decide what you do about it. And by the way, it's perfectly acceptable to accept the risk. I know what that risk is, but I'm going to take it anyway. What you can't do is ignore risk. And I think that way of thinking and that way of understanding what your risks are, what would happen if my systems were unavailable for 24 hours? What would happen if? What would happen if? And play through those scenarios so that you can plan. And I think we discussed it on the previous session. Have that incident response plan baked into the business so that when something does happen, you're not thinking on the fly. You're going through a playbook. You've rehearsed it. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the most critical things that people can do.
Yeah, so obviously kind of preparing well in advance and knowing what these different attacks might look like and what the potential implications might be. I mean, just following on from that then, what advice would you give to those smaller and medium-sized businesses who perhaps don't have a dedicated internal team to manage their cybersecurity, to improve their resilience? I think I remember before you talked about undertaking basic housekeeping with regard to cybersecurity, and you've touched upon it there as well. But are there any further steps to those that are particularly concerned by the cyber threats that can actually materialize?
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's kind of prevention and how do I know if something's happened? And they're two interlinked, but different things. And in terms of the first one, what should I be doing every day anyway? They're the basic things. Making sure your software's patched and up to date. Make sure your antivirus systems are up to date. Make sure you understand if people are trying to get in, so you have visibility of what goes on in your network. And we work with an organization who have a solution that allows you to baseline what normal network traffic looks like. And anything that sits outside of that normal network traffic will get flagged to you and raised to you so that you can go and find out what it is. Because what we talk about is indicators of compromise, or IOCs. And these indicators of compromise would be things like, there's a device on my network that suddenly started communicating with perhaps a system in Russia, for example. It doesn't normally do that. Why is it doing that? This person's logging on at a strange time in the morning and getting their password wrong 5 times. That's not normal behavior. So understanding what good looks like and what normal looks like in your organization goes a long way to, because with these kind of threats, with these kind of attacks, what we find is to start with, they're what we call low and slow. Mm-hmm. They compromise a individual system, more than likely through somebody inadvertently clicking on a link in an email and downloading some malware that they don't know about. But once that has happened, what happens next? Well, typically that piece of software will try and work out where everything else in your network is, where all your users and devices reside, and then try to spread out and compromise lots and lots and lots of different machines before it does anything. And if you can get visibility of the fact that something untoward is happening, something looks like it might not be right, and you can act quickly to remediate against that, it prevents that wider spread. Because if you think about a ransomware attack, for example, what's the purpose of that? Well, if I can encrypt Raj's laptop, great. I've encrypted Raj's laptop. What does that mean? Well, it means Raj is going to have a new laptop. But if that piece of malware that's been installed on your laptop is able to spread itself across the network and start to infect your production servers, all of your users, critical systems, it's not going to detonate, as we say in the trade, until it's got everywhere that it can, because it wants to cause as much disruption and harm as it possibly can. Therefore, if you've got visibility of that early, that's really helpful. You know, and if you wind that back, well, the most likely way I'm going to be infected is by somebody clicking on a link in an email that they shouldn't and downloading some malware, or going to a website that they shouldn't and therefore getting infected from it. Well, what do I do to protect myself against that? Well, make sure that you've got decent anti-malware, antivirus software running on your laptop, and it's up to date, and that you know that it's up to date, that you have the visibility of that. But also think about the end user. How am I making sure that it's as unlikely as possible that one of my employees clicks on something that they shouldn't? What does your security awareness training look like? You know, it's the human firewall. We are the weak link in this thing. The technology is great, 90% of compromises are because a person's done something that they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So really focus on getting that security awareness training robust. Mm-hmm. I've seen too many organizations in my career where security awareness is treated as something, it's a tick box. I do it once a year. I get the PowerPoint out, I dust it off, I blow the dust off it, I stick it up on a screen, I sit the people in a room for half an hour, I talk at them, and they sign a piece of paper to say that they've had security awareness training. That's not security awareness training. That's a tick box. What you need to be doing is constantly trying to safely compromise your employees using a phishing tool so that you can see who are the people in your organization that are likely to be the ones that click on the link, and then give them some extra training and some extra support. When you bring in new starters on board, how do you get them up to the level of cybersecurity awareness that the rest of your organization may already have? And really focus on that side of things, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's all really helpful from a practical point of view. And I think you're right, kind of making that investment in terms of time, money, effort to ensure that all staff members are fully up to scratch and au fait with what needs to be done is going to be absolutely essential moving forward. Phil, thank you so much for that. It's really, really helpful. To our chamber members watching, please remember to keep in touch with your relationship manager for any questions you might have about the current situation and what you'd like to see in terms of lobbying points and advocacy from the chamber. Many thanks.